Hi, I'm Ed Demery, President of Country Mark Log Homes. I'd like to welcome you to Log Home Technology. Whether you're considering building a log home or a timber frame home, I'm going to show you some important differences between a traditional log home and a Country Mark hybrid log home. At Country Mark Log Homes, we design and manufacture hybrid log home systems. Country Mark Log Homes focuses on advanced building technologies for higher energy efficiencies, lower maintenance, while keeping affordability in mind to produce a beautiful, authentic log home appearance. Now there's several differences between a traditional solid log home system and a Country Mark hybrid log home system. We're going to explain some of the differences by heading over to a traditional solid log home to cover how the home is constructed, some of the potential maintenance items an owner may experience. So let's head on over, take a look at a traditional solid log home. This segment of the program, we're going to talk about the differences between a solid log system and a hybrid log system. What we've got here on our table here is basically the building blocks of the perimeter of a solid log system. Starting out with a half log on the bottom, and the next log would be a full log to create the perimeter walls of your log home. Basically, they just come together and you create the height of the log home by simply stacking the different layers of the log profiles to create typically your 9-foot perimeter of the exterior of the house. So in this situation, there is typically a gasket between each layer as you stack these components together to create the height of the log home. Well, each layer has to be held together with something, and there's each company, a lot of different methods for doing this. Some use springs and bolts for tightening these together. Others, some different lag screws, some small, larger lag screws, basically trying to compress all these layers together. But sometimes what can happen is as each layer dries, that is where you create settlement and shrinkage. And therefore each different device has to have some sort of way to compensate for each layer of the log basically shrinking in size. The gray gasket that you see in there is basically the layer that we showed earlier between two stacked logs, and we're on the exterior of the house, and we're showing where over time, as the wall is settling and shrinking, they're coming apart. Other items that you have to be concerned with in this style of construction is obviously electrical and plumbing, HVAC. As you can see here, we went ahead and cut out a section here to show you that on the exterior side of the house, say you needed an electrical outlet, you would need to try to run your electrical in some sort of non-metallic or metallic box to pass your local building codes. And basically you would run your electrical wire through pre-drilled or maybe not pre-drilled holes to get them in this section of the electrical outlet, and that's obviously how you would get your power to that outlet. Same thing with coax cable for video or Cat5 cable for your communication devices in the house. Whether it's interior or exterior, same process. Typically, most building codes in most areas of the country are going to require this to be in some sort of box that would house those electrical components. As each layer shrinks or settles, and most houses would have a minimum of at least 10 layers, that would actually create a situation where the exterior perimeter walls would actually go down. We're on a perimeter log wall here, a solid log wall, and basically we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 sections creating the outside perimeter height of the wall. If per se each layer of log would shrink approximately 1/8 of an inch times 10, that'd be at least 1 1/8 if not more. Typically, 1/8 of an inch would be a minimum amount of shrinkage, sometimes more. In that situation, obviously, if our outside walls are shrinking by 1.5 inches to 1 1/8 inches, basically we have to compensate for that, and that's where the jack screw comes in jack screw would basically be used to level and or adjust for settlement compensation around the perimeter walls of the log home. And that typically would be located in this location in a center beam carrying point load in the house. We're going to need to remove the trim area cover that's covering the jack screw to adjust that. Basically, shrinkage and settlement, as we talked, is resultant from the exterior perimeter walls moving down from compression and or shrinkage of each individual log layer. Basically, above all of your doors and windows, basically your exterior openings, you would need to have a settlement pocket above those doors and windows to compensate for as that log wall moves up and down. Those are typically 1.5 inches to 2 inches in depth above each opening. If you take a look here, we've got some lightly tucked fiberglass insulation, and this is obviously what the homeowner is describing. They're getting, as you can see, bugs and some air infiltration around these openings. If you slide the insulation back, you can see that here's your solid log in our pocket for settlement purposes, and if you look through, that's the actually outside trim board on the structure. So you just have the outside trim board and the inside trim board which we've already removed, because that's the only layer you have to the outside elements. You can see where they've actually stuck and tucked some sort of gasket material in here to try to help compensate for that. In today's home building, obviously our value is a very important thing. Our value is basically how well the home holds heat in. So in a solid log system, typically log walls, say for example this one is 5.5 inches, we'll round that up to 6 inches. Nominal R value per inch is typically around 1.5 per inch for most woods, be it a softwood, a cedar, a hardwood. They're ballpark of about approximately 1.5. So 6 times 1.5 would be approximately 9. So the estimated R value that you would get from this section would be an R9. Okay, we're on the outside of the solid log system and the traditional log home system, and we're going to point out a few things called checking and gapping. Checks and gaps are basically, from whether it's kiln dried or air dried, when you take a large piece of timber or lumber and actually as it dries it'll shrink and it'll actually try to relieve the stress in the outside of the lumber, and it produces a check. A check is an issue where water can get in that. We had a nice spring storm here last night, heavy rains, and the rain water will gather in those and it creates a premature rotting, some decay. The homeowner is experiencing some problems with either snow, water, or Mother Nature getting in through a check. And what they've done is they've actually started trying to fill this with a caulk in this area here. And that's basically about all they can do. Also, we have the gaps. These gaps are produced obviously from time as the logs either settle or shrink, and they pull apart from each other and create a gap. On this end of the house, we counted up earlier before we got out here, and there's actually 20 butt joints where 2 logs come together to make this end of the house. So the number of these gapping potentials on the end of this solid log house is very high, that you're going to produce several of these. And what can happen from the gaps between the 2 logs is obviously that's where you get loss in energy efficiencies from convection of heat loss or conduction, because obviously that's straight into the house from here, and there's typically just a spline or some sort of plastic or something to try to separate the outside from the inside of this log. Well, let's just summarize. We discussed how solid logs are stacked to create the exterior perimeter walls, the efforts required by an electrician, a plumber, and an HVAC contractor to place utilities in the exterior walls. We also covered settlement pockets, slip joints around exterior windows and doors and fireplaces, checks and gapping in the logs, the use of jack screws and different log fasteners when settlement happens and you have to adjust. We also covered R value in wood. All of these can be potential maintenance items and cost you time and money.